Okay, so we're coming almost to the end of our first, let's call it block. So we're gonna do the outline one more time. We've been speaking about our spiritual battle, right? And we've talked about how we have our, let's say, allies in our spiritual battle, and also our enemies, which we have to fight against. Let's look at the allies. So, Greg, what's the first ally that we've spoken about in our spiritual battle?
Prayer.
Yes, prayer, right? Prayer has to be our first ally in our spiritual battle. And when we talked about prayer, we talked about the 5 steps to prayer. David, do you remember the 5 steps?
Better.
Yeah.
Preparatio.
Uh-huh.
Lectio.
Uh-huh.
Contemplatio.
No.
No.
Remember, it's preparing, reading. After you read, what do you do?
Meditatio.
Yes, you ask yourself, how does this apply to my life?
Yeah.
4th step.
Oratio.
Yeah. And last step. Contemplatio. Okay. Yeah.
I think I got it.
Okay. So first ally in a spiritual battle, we said prayer. Jack, do you remember what's our second strong ally in our spiritual battle, in our battle for growth? Yes, sacraments. And when we talked about sacraments, we talked about basically 2 sacraments. Which are those 2 sacraments that really help us in our spiritual battle?
Communion.
The Eucharist and?
Yes. Eucharist. And reconciliation.
Yes. Okay. So, in fact, last time we talked about the Eucharist and we delved into the Holy Mass. Matt, so I asked a very important question. I said, what's the difference between receiving communion and going to Mass? What's missing in communion that it's really the summit of the Mass? Do you remember? You were supposed to read about this looking at the Catechism. 2 words. Brent?
Eucharistic prayer.
Yes, the Eucharistic prayer. Well, good job. We talked about the Eucharistic prayer being the summit of the Mass, right? Our prayer we said thanksgiving, memorial, sacrifice, presence, all of those different aspects in the Eucharist. Our third ally, we mentioned, let's call it the good deeds. Okay, let's look at our enemies. So number 1 in our enemies. This was the first time we met. Dan, do you remember which was the first enemy we talked about?
I don't remember which one's first.
Okay.
The flesh.
Okay, we mentioned the flesh. It's true.
I don't remember the order.
Joe, do you understand how is the flesh our enemy?
Because it is seeking its own pleasure.
Yes, great answer. So we spoke about how the flesh is our enemy in 2 big senses. Number 1, because the flesh always looks for pleasure without the considerations of reason, but also who remembers the second aspect in which the flesh is our enemy?
Avoids pain.
Yes, because it flees from pain. And we said, if you want to seek salvation, you need to refrain, you need to subdue the flesh in its desire to seek for pleasure. But if you want to look for holiness, you have to teach the flesh that it has to undergo suffering. Okay, so Mike, what's our second enemy? We've talked about flesh, but the first time we met, we talked about
The devil.
yes, the devil. Because the devil mainly is our enemy because he works through temptation. Okay, today we're going to talk about our third enemy, and the third enemy in our spiritual growth is the world. Okay, but before we move into the world, I just want to make one clarification. To be precise, theologically speaking, these three, they are our secondary enemies. Who is the primary enemy in our spiritual growth? Easy.
Ourselves.
What's the main obstacle in spiritual growth?
Pride.
Sin. Sin. Right? Sin is the main obstacle in our spiritual growth. These three enemies are our secondary enemies because they all lead us into sin. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the world as our spiritual enemy. David, I know we haven't talked about this before, but when you hear the word world as our spiritual enemy, what comes to your mind?
I think of distractions.
Okay, distractions. Zach, what comes to your mind when you hear about the world?
Material things.
Material things. David?
Culture.
Okay, so let me give you a definition of world that has basically three elements. Easy definition. Okay, so the world is the atmosphere in which we live in, where men, so let's say first element, atmosphere. Second element, in which men and culture live seeking for pleasures. Let's say seeking for the worldly goods. And completely forgotten about God. Forgotten is double T. Okay, so the world is basically the atmosphere of society in which we all live in, where people are seeking for material goods or the worldly pleasures, completely forgotten about God. And this is our enemy because it is inevitable for this world to influence our own lives. So the question is, what's the main ways in which the world affects our lives? How is the world our enemy? 4 ways. First way, because the world sells us ideas, and do you have a word, in Spanish we have a word que es como máximas, like, do you know what a máxima is? Like something that you guide your life by? Es una máxima, something that...
A maxim.
A maxim? Okay. First way in which the world is our enemy is because it offers us maxims that are contrary to the gospel. Okay? In fact, the maxims that the world offers us are exactly opposite to the maxims that the gospel offers us. So what are the 4 goods that the world offers us as the most desirable goods?
Money.
Okay? Yes. The first maxim that the world sells us is the most important thing that you have to acquire in your life is money. It's all about the money. It's all about making as much money as you can. And who are the people we envy the most? The people that make the most money. Who are the people that we respect the most? The people that make the most money. How they get their money, that doesn't matter. What matters is having the money. Like, treasure is what matters. And this is a maxim that affects us all. Like, who of us can say, I'm not interested in money? Obviously, you guys have to make money. You have to sustain your families and your lives. But the first maxim that the world instills in us is, you're worth how much money you have. And a person is worth how much money they have. And you have to treat people according to the amount of money they have. That's hard for you because you work in a fundraising. And you know, that type of worldly thought comes into the church too. Because in the church you have to look for sponsors. And sometimes you find yourself granting more attention to people that have more money than to people that have less money. And that's not a maxim from the gospel, that's a maxim from the world. Obviously, I mean, you also have to be strategic, right? Without undermining the maxim of the gospel. So the first lie that is like a direct opposite to the gospel is what really matters is money. And you are worth according to how much money you make, and other people are worth according to how much money they make. Okay. Second maxim that the world sells us or tries to instill in us.
Honor.
Honor. Let's put it this way. It's hard to distinguish, but there's also one that is power. Okay? But how could we describe honor? We could say what matters is what people think about you. And if people think good about you, then that's great. What really matters is the opinion that other people have about you. So, for example, when I think about honor, I know that this is not only about honor, but nowadays it could be like, how many people are interested in having a lot of followers in social media? And how it's so relevant for people to have followers. That's honor, that gives you status, right? Right now we say, oh, that's stupid, who cares? But deep inside, maybe that's something we also want, or I don't know. So, honor. The world also teaches it's all about power. It's all about being influential. It's all about being the man who makes the calls. That's what life is about being the boss, being the person who is in charge, being influential. That's what matters. And the fourth, who can guess what's the fourth maxim of the world?
An eye for an eye.
We could say maybe that's with power, like easy guys, pleasure. Pleasure. The world teaches us what matters is having a good time. And just let's think one moment about music nowadays. I don't know about you guys, but back in Peru, teenagers that I met all the time doing confirmation, the music they listened to the most was reggaeton. Do you get reggaeton here? Have you ever stopped to hear the lyrics of reggaeton?
What is that? Reggae. Oh.
No, it's not reggae.
Reggaeton. Is it different?
Yeah.
What is it?
I guess like
Dance.
it's like
Like Caribbean.
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. It's like
Sex music. Mr. Worldwide.
no,
Straight for it.
no, literally it's sex music. And if you go to Spotify and you see what's trending right now, like what's the thing that people are hearing the most, I don't know what's going on here. I've never seen the trends here, but when Spotify offered me like, what's trending in Peru? I'm honest, guys, it was pornographic music. All of it. All of the lyrics were pornographic, without exception. They were all about that and nothing else. So what's a maxim that the world sells us?
That's very
Yeah, that's
different kind of pleasure.
yeah.
So the only so the fourth maxim that the world sells us is it's all about having a good time. And God is so merciful that He's not gonna mind if you have a good time. But it's interesting, again, because we see the maxims of the world and they are directly in opposition to the maxims of the gospel. It's impressive. Like the plan that God has that Jesus brings to us is exactly in opposition to all of this.
I had a question though, real quick before you go on.
Yeah.
Is honor, I mean, I always think of being honorable or honor itself as being a good thing. Would it be more just like putting somebody else up on a pedestal that's, I mean, would honor be the best?
Would be fame.
Yeah, or the best
praise of
choice
other
of word
men.
or
Yeah, it means the praise of other men.
honor is?
It's seeking the praise of other men instead of, let's say,
It's seeking it, but you can say that
For
person
its
is
own sake.
honorable because of their
no, that's okay. Yeah, someone being
virtue,
honorable.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
essentially.
Well, and we should honor people who are virtuous.
Right.
But it's
Just
about,
using that word in a negative way
yes, yes.
because it's seeking it as opposed to.
Well, and like
Earning
also
it?
you can like
Seeing it
Here.
for itself.
you
rather
can
than-
act in a way that looks honorable without being honorable too.
Yes. Okay, so question for you guys. In the gospel, in the same way that a country has its own, in Spanish we have the word constitución. Constitution? Okay. Where in the gospel, Dan is not allowed to answer, where in the gospel would we find the constitution of what it means to be a Christian? Yes, the Beatitudes. Those are the constitutions of what it means to be a Christian. Think about how the Beatitudes match up against what the world offers us. Like it's exactly the opposite. What's the first Beatitude? Blessed the poor. Blessed the ones who cry. Blessed the ones who are persecuted. Blessed are the ones that everything that you can think of is exactly the opposite. And a very interesting comment of Thomas of Aquinas, he says, let's look at the passion of Jesus. Let's look at Jesus in the passion. It's beautiful because Jesus in the passion, what does he do? He defeats all of the maxims that the world offers us. For example, money. Jesus in the cross has nothing, like he's so poor that he's wearing nothing at all. Let's think about Jesus' life. What were his possessions? Have you ever thought that Jesus chose to be poor? Guys, this is something we don't think about. Jesus chose to be poor. Have you thought about where did God choose Jesus to be born? Have you thought about how Jesus decided to be the son of we say a carpenter, but we could say like an artisan? Let's look at Jesus' life, ministry. Did Jesus, did he had a lot of luxuries and such? So it's beautiful to see, number one, Jesus always embraced poverty. Poverty. This is not an invitation to be responsible with your money, give your money away. I'm not saying that. It's just, I think, an occasion for us to remember that there is something in the gospel that really moves us to have a consideration of, the right consideration of money. You guys, so what's the ideal? Jesus says the ideal is everything you have, sell it, give it to the poor, and have a treasure in heaven. That's what we have chosen, the religious. You are not called to live that literally, but you're called to live that in spirit. So this is opening like a whole talk, and we're not going to go there. But I guess a good question would be, do you guys as Catholics have the right consideration of money illuminated by the gospel and not by the world? Do you have that real, let's say, way of facing that aspect of your life? Like in light of the gospel and not in light of the world? That's a big question. But I was saying, the maxims of the world, the maxims of Jesus, we can see those maxims in the Beatitudes. But we can also see those maxims in the Passion. And St. Thomas of Aquino says, it's beautiful to see how in the Passion, Jesus defeated these four maxims of the world. Number one, he died poor on the cross. He had nothing on him. He had nothing as a patrimony to give on. Honor. You know that the cross was the most dishonorable way of dying. Let's think about power. He had no one to turn to. He had no influence over no one. His apostles left him. Let's think about pleasure. He endured the worst pain in the world. So the question is, if we follow Jesus, if he is our master and we're his disciples, what is leading our lives? The maxims of the world or the maxims of the gospel? So, again, what's the first way in which the world affects us in our spiritual battle? Because it tells us these maxims, and the world presents these maxims all the time to us. Okay. Second way in which the world affects us. Okay. The second way in which the world affects us is persecution. We could say the world doesn't help us to live our faith. I'm not going to say that we're not going to live our faith because of persecution, but I can think of this example. Maybe you have more examples than I do. But let's think, I don't know, your wife is pregnant again, and you're having like number 5. And maybe your coworkers tell you like, what are you up to? Like,
You're taking over.
yeah. because people are gonna tell you like, why are you having so many kids?
Started that at number 3.
I
They-
get it now. At 24 years old, what are you doing?
Yeah. Like people, they're gonna tell you, hey, you have to enjoy life. You have to enjoy life. What's the point of having so many kids? Because kids are gonna take away fun from your life, right? So I'm so pleased to see here in the States so many Catholics that get married young, that have a lot of kids. But in Peru, even among the Catholics, people get married a lot older in life and they don't have a lot of kids. And I don't think they're practicing NFP because NFP is something really hard for the world to understand. And like, again, the big question that Catholics have to ask themselves, like, do we have real reasons right now not to have more kids? Or is my reasoning influenced by this criteria? So persecution is real because people who strive to live a Catholic life, people are going to say, you're an idiot. Like, you're missing out on so many fun things. Like, I don't know, maybe Greg's friends are telling like, why are you like tying up so soon when you have so many opportunities to enjoy? So the second way in which the world affects us as our enemy is because the world persecutes when you live according to the faith. And the more you live according to the faith, the greater the persecution. That's why when we don't feel the persecution, that's sign. Because it means that the world and us, like, we're part of the world, but we have to stand out, right? And when we stand out, what happens? Persecution.
Sometimes that persecution can come from inside the church as well.
Yes. Yeah, sure. Third point. I think that one of the ways that the world also acts as our enemy is just the availability of erotism and sensuality everywhere. Like, I don't know, guys. Yeah.
Is this, so we're talking about the world as like a creation. Is this the world post the fall?
So,
Or like would the world have been this way?
so
Original sin?
no, definitely not before
Okay.
original sin. But when we think about the world, let's not think about creation. Let's think about world more related to the term worldly,
Okay.
mundano. Do you have the term mundane?
Yeah, we do.
Mundane.
I've never heard of that context though.
They would be like boring or uninteresting.
Okay, yeah. So no, it doesn't translate from Spanish then. Okay, so let's think about world more than creation, because creation itself is good.
Right.
Creation comes from God. Creation is beautiful. No, we're thinking about the atmosphere created by sin that incites you to sin, too, and to take, okay. So third aspect in which the world is our enemy because of the excess of pleasure and sensuality that's available. Let's think about cultural expressions like movies, TV shows, social media. That's all part of the world. And like nowadays, it's hard to use social media. I mean, I don't use social media, but the amount of sensual things that you find online or like people's profiles, it's scary. Like you ask yourself, where are the parents of this woman, right? What's going on? But I'm saying mostly like the world offers you an availability of sensuality, erotism, pleasure that's hard to cope with, right? I don't think this requires a lot of explanation. Like, I don't know, maybe you guys want to see TV shows with your wives. I don't know. It's hard to choose a TV show, I guess, right? Because of the amount of filth that there's in everything. In that way, the world is our enemy because it leads us not to live a virtuous life. And that's the influence of the world. And the fourth point is, let's call it bad examples and scandal. Like, I don't know, when you read the news, you find so many things about people who are supposed to be, let's say, role models, and the only thing that they provide are bad examples. So let's move to the last question is, how do we face the world? Because we've spoken before about how to face the flesh and how to face the devil. The question is, how do we face the spiritual enemy of the world? Let's do it here. How do we face it? Okay, so the first answer is we should all be hermits and monks away from the world. But that's not real for you guys, right? You guys are married, so it seems like the easy solution is I don't want to be exposed to anything that the world offers to me. I wanna comment on something that I think is very interesting. Something that I really appreciate about American Catholics, or let's say a segment of American Catholics, is I think they really understand the perverse influence of the world and how they want to filter what comes into their families. Why am I saying this? I have no memory of any person in Peru whose parents had any sort of filters for them. Like my parents, they never even thought about watching what TV shows I was exposed to. Not because they were bad parents. It's just because that's not part of their formation. But I noticed that here it's very different. So for example, I don't know if I've shared this with you before, but I was really impressed when I spoke, I don't know, let's say with Brother Evan, and he comes from a strong Catholic household. He told me, when I was growing up, I saw very few movies. Like my parents were very conscious about what I was watching and what I was not watching. He said, we did a bunch of things together. We played board games. But why do I say this? Because it seems to me like Catholics here have a greater understanding of the perverse influence of the world in their families and their households, and they put up stronger, let's say, barrier. But I think this is also the occasion, and a reminder for you guys is, you have a responsibility too in your household to keep the influence of culture away, to monitor, to filter, to make sure what comes into your house is wholesome and good for your families, for your kids, right? That is something that, unfortunately, I didn't grow up with. Like, no filters. For example, The Simpsons. Brother Evan told me, my family, The Simpsons wasn't. Brother John, he comes from a family of 8, very strong Catholic family. He told me his parents didn't allow him, they were very reluctant to let him see Harry Potter, To me, that was so funny. Like for me, Harry Potter, I would have seen it like 10 years old, no problem. He told me that he wasn't allowed in his house to see Hunger Games. Like to me, I said, what's wrong with Hunger Games? But I think it's good. I think it's good that families, that you guys as head of your families understand the perverse influence of the world and putting a filter between the world and your household. I think this is pretty clear for all of you guys. It's pretty clear. But for me, it was a surprise. One more example. Brother John told me that like when he came to live with us, I hope I don't give you a bad example, but we watch a bunch of horror movies. And we like horror movies, but I don't want to be this a justification, but horror movies give you interesting insights of how the devil works. Okay? He told me, in 1 month with you guys, living with you guys, I've seen more horror movies than in my whole life. So I think that it's important for you guys to be able to understand that the world is a perverse enemy that you have to keep away from your house. But I think there has to be a good discernment, because I also see a certain danger in being too severe, too rigid. It seems to me like sometimes when parents are too rigid, like kids also need some
There has to be some,
malice.
some danger.
Yeah, like some danger, like for example, I don't know. I think about Brother John and Brother Evan. They go to Peru to the novitiate. They're gonna be like bullied a little bit. Like, come on.
We did a study, and this is a little bit off topic, but like back in, if you look at photos of playgrounds, back in like the 60s, 70s, it was all metal structures, super high, no foundation, it was like asphalt and like concrete, right? And then it went to the far extreme where everything was just made so safe that there was no risk involved. So kids didn't take risk in how they played. And so now it's involved in this like risky, safe play.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a balance of both worlds where it still allows the child to develop in a sense of taking that risk. Oh, if I, try and cross this 4-inch beam 6 feet in the air, I may fall, but it's not trying to protect them and put them in a bubble. And
Yeah.
if you don't take the risk all out of it, same thing with certain aspects of the world, there's some exposure that's good and necessary for them to develop and understand that it is bad, and that's not what I want.
I think you've explained it pretty well.
I mean, we as young adults, right, have lived in that area of like, having been able to watch The Simpsons or whatever the case may be, and seeing the what that is. And I mean, I know for myself, like I don't want my kids. I watched everything under the sun as a kid. There was nothing.
No restrictions, just like me.
So when I got married, and Ann and I were going through my stuff that I brought with me from Virginia, and she's like, "Oh, here's your whole chest of like every movie under the sun. We're a big movie family." And she's like, "Well, you're gonna throw that out?" I'm like, "Hell no, these are my movies." Well, of course, I mean, I've got all the shoot 'em up movie, everything. And it's like, "Well, do you want our kids?" I'm like, "Well, we don't have kids now. We could just hold on." But that was the whole thing. It's like, do we want our kids to even be able to look at those?
Yeah, but something also very, very interesting to that point is, I always wonder how many attitudes do kids copy from movies when it comes to the way they interact with their parents? Because I think that movies really encourage like, be rebellious, or you can tell whatever you want to your parents. But Brother Evan was telling me, like, obviously there's something rebellious about teens, wherever they are, but how many attitudes they pick up from the things they see? So, okay,
Yeah.
so.
Also father figures, I think, in a lot of movies, a lot of shows these days.
That's what he said. That's what he said. That all the father figures are like, pathetic maybe is too strong of a word, but not
They're weak.
weak.
They're not men. It's like they're pushovers, or they're like, oh.
I found it. I think
That's why Andy Griffith's the best.
depending. I mean, almost anything. Like I think not to make excuses, but I think with conversation, almost you can find redeeming quality in almost anything. I mean, even if it's talking as like an example of what not to do, right? Which is what like horror movies are like. Their whole thing is the people that get killed are all sinful in some way, and like that's like the person that gets away is the person that was like the good one in general, right? That's like historically the thing. And yeah, so it's like if you're watching a show that has a father figure that's really a loser or something, you can address that and talk about it. That's what I find really like interesting about stories and stuff is like we can talk about this now and say, what did you get out of it? What did you think of that? You know, do you think he did the best thing? And I definitely have done that with Peter in certain cases where it's like, do you think that was the best thing that person could have done, or maybe they could have done something different,
Yeah.
or whatever.
If you're watching it with them, it's totally different.
Oh yeah, yeah. You
But
gotta
it's,
be
it's the psychology of how they've turned like the father figure into kind of the bumbling idiot as opposed to the head of the
I think
household.
it's called the Homer Simpson effect.
There you go.
That's actually what it's called.
Okay. So
It's better they made it like a thing.
Yeah, I think so.
how do we face the world? How do we defeat the world? So 3 things. Number 1 is the first way we face the world and we defeat the world is running away from the dangerous occasions, right? So first way is we have to understand that we're weak and there are certain things that we have to flee and that we have to stay away from the occasion of sin. So, for example, right now I'm thinking about, I'm not against people having social media, right? People can have social media. But if you notice in your own life that social media is dangerous because it has an amount of sensuality and erotism that is excessive, how do you face the world? You stay away from the occasion of sin. If you I don't know, enjoy a TV show but there's too much of sensual content, you give up that thing. So the first way you face the world and you face the enemy is you stay away from the dangerous occasions of sin. I mean, there's no way around it. There's no way, and that normally also has to do with our capacity of self-denial and of recognizing our weakness and saying, I'm weak, I will not give up this. Right? So first step is stay away from the dangerous occasion of sin. Movies, social media, music, all of that perverse influence that comes into our lives that is against the spirit of the gospel. Second point, the second idea is to grow in your spirit of faith. So this makes me think about how do we nurture our minds and our souls? So the question is, what do we allow to enter our senses? Well, what am I thinking about? Like, when we're driving to our work, what are we listening to?
Okay. Sorry.
Like,
That's the immediate answer.
are we listening to things that strengthen us spiritually? When we have, I don't know, when we're doing our chores around the house and maybe we're with our headphones, what are we listening to? What are we reading? So the second way we face the world is nurture yourself with things that increase your faith and that lead you to live with more intensely the spirit of the gospel. So it's not only about running away, it's also about strengthening your sense of faith. And the third part that has to do with persecutions, sometimes the world also kind of corners us in wanting to, we don't want to appear to be too Catholic before other people, so the world kind of also puts us pressure so that we water down our faith. So the last recommendation is you live your faith fully, and if you live your faith fully, people will stop bugging you. Like, if people see that you're strong about your faith, they won't tease you. So be open and be courageous and be proud about your faith. And that's the way the world leaves you alone. So third enemy, the world, the atmosphere where we seek the atmosphere that we live in, where what matters are the worldly goods and people live forgetting about God, it expresses itself in four maxims, in maxims: persecution, pleasure, sensuality. How do we face it? Ideally, we would live as monks, but that's not going to happen. So we have to flee from the occasions, we have to grow in our sense of faith, and we have to be strong about giving, about being witnesses to the gospel. Yes?
It seems like the way that we face the world is by to not face it. It's like kind of avoiding it, kind of going around it. But are we not in the world to convert the world?
Yes.
Are we there to like address the issues, to like fight them, versus like kind of just skirt around them? Like go, I'm gonna go be holy over here, and y'all do your sin over here. Right? Aren't we supposed to go convert?
Yes. And that's something we'll talk about. So I was thinking, what could we talk about once we're done with the block? And I think the next thing we have to address is the vocation of lay people. What you are supposed to be living out in the world. So we're going to be talking about that once we're done with this and once we're done with the exam. But yeah, I mean, you're completely right. Okay?
Brother, I heard you mention this exam a couple times. Is there an exam?
Yeah. It's going to be a multiple choice exam, 10 questions. And it's going to be, I mean,
Let's go.
Jesus is the answer to every question.
Jesus loves you.
Sanctifying grace.
It's just for me to get a sense of how much you're retaining of what we're talking about. It's going to be easy. Okay, so let's take